Picture this: two legendary brotherhoods of knights, each draped in the sacred symbols of their faith, each sworn to a life of service and sacrifice in the name of God. On the surface, they were allies united in the great struggle to reclaim and protect the Holy Land. But beneath that veneer of holy purpose, a very different story was unfolding. A story of ambition, jealousy, and a secret war for influence that would last for centuries. This is the epic, hidden struggle between the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, a rivalry that shaped the medieval world in ways you were never taught. We all know the popular tales of crusading glory, of heroic knights and sacred quests, but few are aware of the intense, often bitter competition that simmered just below the surface. This was not just a clash of swords, it was a battle of ideologies, economies, and political cunning that reached from the dusty roads of Jerusalem to the glittering courts of Europe. What started as two complementary missions, one order dedicated to armed protection, the other to healing and charity, slowly twisted into a fierce contest for power, wealth, and legacy. While both groups publicly shared the goal of defending Christendom, behind closed doors they were maneuvering against one another, each trying to outshine the other in influence and prestige. They built vast networks of fortresses, banked unimaginable treasures, and whispered in the ears of kings and popes, all while maintaining a fragile facade of unity. This hidden conflict was driven by something deeply human: the desire for dominance, the fear of irrelevance, and the intoxicating lure of power. And though their world was one of faith and chivalry, their actions were often shaped by the same ambitions and insecurities that drive power struggles today. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on this extraordinary saga. We'll explore how these two orders, both born from piety and purpose, became locked in a covert battle that would influence the fate of nations, redirect the course of history, and leave a legacy that still echoes in our modern world. From whispered alliances and shocking betrayals to economic warfare and ideological clashes, this is a story of how rivalry can fester even among those who share the highest ideals. So join me as we step back into an age of faith, steel, and shadowy intrigue to uncover a chapter of history that has remained in the shadows for far too long. This is more than a tale of medieval knights. It's a timeless lesson in how power works, how institutions compete, and how the quest for influence can reshape the world. To truly grasp the depth of their legendary rivalry, we must first travel back to their modest, almost unassuming origins. The story begins not with grand armies or vast treasures, but with a profound response to human suffering. In the chaotic aftermath of the First Crusade, which captured Jerusalem in 1099, the roads to the Holy City were notoriously perilous. Bandits and marauders preyed upon the thousands of devout Christian pilgrims who journeyed from Europe, desperate to walk in the footsteps of Christ. It was into this landscape of faith and danger that two very different brotherhoods emerged, each answering a distinct cry for help. The Knights Hospitaller, officially known as the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, was the elder of the two. Its story starts around the year 1070, decades before the Crusaders even arrived. It began not as a military order at all, but as a charitable Benedictine brotherhood running a hospital and hostel in Jerusalem to care for sick, poor, and injured pilgrims. Its founder, a humble monk and merchant from Amalfi named Gerard Tom, secured permission from the Muslim caliph to establish this house of mercy. Their mission was pure compassion, driven by the biblical injunction to care for the sick and welcome the stranger. They wore a simple black mantle with a white 8-pointed cross, a symbol representing the 8 Beatitudes and their vow to live a life of blessed service. For nearly 50 years, their work was solely one of healing and hospitality, a beacon of selfless charity in a volatile land. Then, in 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens presented himself to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. He proposed a radical new idea, an order of monks who were also warriors. With 8 fellow knights, he founded the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, who would become known to history as the Knights Templar. Their purpose was starkly different from the Hospitallers. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but their daily work was not in a hospital ward. It was on the road, sword in hand. They vowed to protect pilgrims on the dangerous stretch between the Mediterranean coast and Jerusalem. They were given headquarters on the Temple Mount, believed to be the site of King Solomon's temple, from which they derived their famous name. Their seal, showing 2 knights sharing a single horse, powerfully symbolized their stated commitment to poverty and brotherhood. Initially, their roles were perfectly complementary, even symbiotic. One order healed the wounds inflicted by the journey, the other prevented those wounds from happening in the first place. The chronicler William of Tyre noted this early spirit of cooperation, writing that both orders were devoted to the divine service and the care of the poor, each fulfilling their duty with great diligence. They were 2 sides of the same coin, united in the service of a higher cause. The Templars, with their military discipline, offered safety. The Hospitallers, with their medical expertise, offered salvation of a different kind. For a time, this harmony persisted. Papal bulls granted them protection and privileges, and donations of land and money began to flow in from pious nobles across Europe who wanted to support their holy work. Yet within this cooperation, the seeds of future conflict were already being sown. The very nature of their mandates contained the DNA of divergence. The Hospitallers' identity was rooted in open-hearted charity, a public service that generated immense goodwill. The Templars' identity was forged in martial secrecy and the closed ranks of an elite fighting force. One was defined by its openness to the needy, the other by its protection from enemies. This fundamental difference in character, one inherently outward-looking, the other inward-looking, would eventually propel them on a collision course. Their evolution from pious foundations into instruments of immense power was not a betrayal of their origins, but a seemingly inevitable consequence of them. But this harmony, this shared purpose born of necessity, could not last. The very success of their missions planted the seeds for a dramatic and far-reaching transformation. From their humble beginnings as protectors and caregivers, both orders began to amass a kind of power and wealth that was virtually unprecedented in the medieval world. They evolved from brotherhoods of service into formidable international corporations, complete with vast estates, complex financial networks, and influence that rivaled kingdoms. This incredible expansion of resources didn't just make them rich, it fundamentally altered their relationship with each other and with the world, setting the stage for a rivalry as much about economics as it was about ideology. The Templars' ascent into the upper echelons of power was nothing short of meteoric. Their initial vow of poverty became almost ironic as they pioneered one of the most sophisticated banking systems Europe had ever seen. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced the constant threat of robbery. The Templars offered an ingenious solution. A traveler could deposit their cash at a Templar preceptory in London or Paris and receive an encrypted letter of credit. They could then present this letter at a Templar house in Jerusalem or Acre and receive the equivalent sum in local currency minus a small fee. This system was revolutionary. It effectively created a safe, international wire service centuries before its time. Kings, nobles, and even popes began using the Templars as their personal treasurers and lenders. They financed wars, managed royal debts, and safeguarded the crown jewels of England and France. Their network of nearly 9,000 properties, from sprawling commanderies to simple farms, stretched from Scotland to Cyprus, generating immense agricultural revenue and creating a web of economic and political influence that was impossible to ignore. Their military successes, particularly during the Second Crusade, further cemented their reputation and filled their coffers. As the most disciplined and fearless fighting force in Outremer, they were often granted castles, lands, and trading privileges as rewards for their service. Each victory brought not just glory but tangible assets. However, this very success bred a culture of secrecy and independence. Their financial dealings were complex and closely guarded, and their answerability was ultimately only to the Pope himself. This autonomy, while a source of their strength, also fostered a deep-seated suspicion among secular rulers who owed them money and rival institutions who coveted their power. The Hospitallers, meanwhile, charted a different but equally impressive path to greatness. Their power was built not in the counting house, but in the hospital ward and on the land. Their reputation for charity and healing made them darlings of the European nobility, who showered them with donations of land and money in their wills, hoping to secure divine favor. This created a snowball effect. More resources meant they could build bigger and better hospitals, which in turn burnished their reputation and attracted even more donations. They became legendary for their medical expertise, with their main hospital in Jerusalem said to hold up to 2,000 patients from all faiths, a level of care unimaginable anywhere else at the time. But to protect this charitable empire, they too became a formidable military power. Their management of the Crac des Chevaliers, arguably the greatest crusader castle ever built, is a perfect example of their blended identity. This colossal fortress in modern-day Syria was not just a military stronghold. It was the administrative center for vast surrounding lands, a source of revenue from taxes and agriculture, and a symbol of their permanent, rooted presence. They became masters of garrison warfare and defensive strategy, controlling key territories that were essential for the survival of the Crusader states. Their wealth was more visibly tied to land management and the sheer scale of their humanitarian operations, which gave them a powerful moral authority that the more secretive Templars sometimes lacked. This rapid accumulation of wealth by both orders made them indispensable to the feudal structure, but it also made them targets. Kings grew envious of their financial independence, and local bishops resented their exemption from tithes and their direct reporting line to the Pope. Most importantly, their parallel rise created an inevitable and intensifying friction. They were no longer two parts of a whole. They were two massive, powerful entities operating in the same small space, competing for the same donations, the same strategic castles, and the same influence at court. The same European monarch who took a loan from the Templars might also leave a generous bequest to the Hospitallers, forcing the orders into a quiet, behind-the-scenes competition for patronage. This economic rivalry, simmering beneath the surface of their holy vows, would soon boil over into open conflict, transforming a partnership of faith into a bitter struggle for supremacy. Yet this growing wealth and influence could not exist in a vacuum. As their treasuries swelled and their landholdings expanded, the fundamental differences in their very reason for being began to surface. This was far more than a simple competition for resources. It was a profound clash of ideologies, a deep philosophical schism over what it truly meant to serve God in the Holy Land. The Templars and Hospitallers, though both military orders, had evolved from entirely different roots, and those roots now dictated two opposing visions of power and piety. Their rivalry became a battle of identities, symbolized in the very fabric they wore and the privileges they guarded so jealously. The Knights Templar were, at their core, an embodiment of sacred violence. Their identity was forged in the furnace of combat, and their entire existence was structured around the concept of the warrior monk. They saw themselves as the armored fist of God, and their purpose was not just to protect pilgrims but to aggressively expand and defend Christendom's borders through sheer military might. Their famous red cross on a white mantle was more than just a uniform, it was a powerful declaration. The white represented purity and a life beyond worldly sin, while the bold red cross openly proclaimed their willingness to martyr themselves in battle, to shed their blood for the faith. Their ethos was one of discipline, secrecy, and unwavering loyalty to the order above all else. They operated as a closed, elite brotherhood, and their internal affairs were shrouded in mystery, which only amplified their aura of power and, eventually, the suspicion that surrounded them. Their strength was drawn from their unity and their ability to act as a single, formidable entity, answering only to the Pope. In stark contrast, the Knights Hospitaller never fully shed their original, charitable skin. Even as they became a formidable military force, their primary identity remained tied to healing and hospitality. Their symbol, the distinct white 8-pointed cross on a black mantle, spoke to a different set of values. The 8 points were said to represent the 8 Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, blessings for the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers. Their mission was one of open service. While the Templars built impenetrable fortresses, the Hospitallers built hospitals that were renowned for accepting the sick and wounded of all faiths, a radical concept of mercy in that era. Their power was derived not from secrecy, but from their very public and celebrated works of charity, which generated immense goodwill and a reputation for righteousness that made them incredibly difficult to criticize or attack. This ideological divide was not merely theoretical, it was codified and exacerbated by the highest authority in Christendom. Papal bulls, the official decrees of the Pope, explicitly granted each order a set of privileges that reinforced their distinct roles and, unintentionally, their sense of competition. The bull Omni Datum Optimum, issued in 1139, was a monumental charter for the Templars, placing them under direct papal authority, exempting them from tithes, and allowing them to build their own oratories. This created a state within a state, a powerful entity that was untouchable by local bishops and secular rulers. For the Hospitallers, bulls like Pi Postulatio Voluntatis did much the same, solidifying their independence and right to collect resources for their charitable works. These privileges meant that the two orders often operated on a parallel but separate tracks, each reporting directly to Rome, each fiercely protective of their unique rights and jealously watching as the other accrued more land, more wealth, or more influence. They were like two champion athletes on the same team, each believing their method was the righteous path to victory, each vying for the coach's ultimate approval. This underlying tension over purpose and principle meant that every interaction, from dividing spoils after a battle to negotiating for control of a strategic castle, was infused with a layer of philosophical competition. It was a cold war of ideals that would soon enough ignite into open conflict. It was only a matter of time before the simmering ideological and economic tensions between the Templars and Hospitallers erupted into direct and open confrontation. The fragile Crusader states, a narrow strip of land perpetually under threat, became the stage for their first major clashes. Here, in the pressured environment of a kingdom fighting for its survival, disputes over land, resources, and authority were not academic debates. they were existential struggles that could determine the fate of the entire Christian enterprise in the Holy Land. The most coveted prizes in this high-stakes game were the formidable castles that controlled trade routes, water sources, and strategic mountain passes. One of the most telling early conflicts erupted over the mighty fortress of Baghdad, located in the Amidst mountains north of Antioch. Originally captured and garrisoned by the Templars, it was lost to the legendary Muslim commander Saladin. After it was recaptured, a fierce dispute broke out between the two orders over who had the rightful claim to its ownership and the immense strategic advantage it provided. The argument grew so heated and intractable that it required the personal intervention of Prince Bohemond IV of Antioch to temporarily settle the matter, a clear sign that secular rulers were now being forced to act as referees in the squabbles of the two most powerful institutions in their realm. The royal court of Jerusalem itself became a buzzing hive of their competition, a behind-the-scenes battlefield where influence was the ultimate currency. The young and often vulnerable kings of Jerusalem found themselves perpetually caught between the two orders, each whispering counsel that conveniently aligned with their own interests. The Templars, with their vast financial resources and aggressive military posture, often advocated for bold, confrontational strategies. The Hospitallers, with their broader network of land-based supply lines and more cautious defensive outlook, frequently pushed for more measured, sustainable approaches. This created a volatile and divided command structure during critical military campaigns. A chronicler might note that during a council of war, the Grand Master of the Temple would insist on a swift attack to seize glory and plunder, while the Grand Master of the Hospital would argue for reinforcing a garrison or securing a supply route, each position subtly undermining the other and leaving the king to make an impossible choice between two expert but deeply biased opinions. Perhaps the most damaging public spectacles were their disputes over the spoils of war. After a successful battle or the capture of a city, the division of loot, gold, silks, weapons, and prisoners for ransom was a serious matter that could fund an order's operations for years. There are accounts from chronicles of the two orders literally arguing over piles of captured goods on the battlefield, each claiming their contribution had been greater and thus deserved a larger share. These unseemly squabbles, happening amidst the carnage of a holy war, severely damaged their reputations for pious selflessness. The image of knights sworn to poverty bickering over treasure presented a powerful propaganda gift to their critics and deeply troubled the clergy who witnessed it. The friction became so routine and corrosive that popes were repeatedly forced to issue letters and decrees admonishing them to cooperate. Pope Alexander III once wrote a stern missive to both orders, pleading for unity and reminding them that their internal discord was a greater danger to the Crusader states than any Muslim army. He warned that their rivalry was causing scandal across Christendom and providing aid to the enemies of the faith. These initial confrontations, from the struggle over a single castle to the unseemly scramble for spoils, revealed a profound and dangerous truth. The Templars and Hospitallers had become so powerful, so confident in their own autonomous authority, that they often seemed to prioritize their order's advantage over the collective good of the kingdom they were sworn to defend. Their rivalry was no longer a hidden undercurrent. It was an active force shaping military strategy, court politics, and the very viability of the crusading project. Each skirmish, each bitter argument, was a battle in a secret war for supremacy, proving that the greatest threat to their holy cause sometimes came not from outside the walls, but from within. While their rivalry played out dramatically on the battlefields of the Holy Land, a far more subtle and perhaps more dangerous game was being waged thousands of miles away in the royal courts and papal palaces of Europe. As both orders amassed vast estates and wealth across the continent, their competition inevitably shifted from military spoils to political influence, transforming them into powerful lobbyists and kingmakers. This was no longer just a conflict between two knightly brotherhoods. It was a high-stakes chess match played on a board that stretched from London to Rome, with the fate of nations hanging in the balance. The Templars and Hospitallers understood that true, lasting power was not just won with the sword, but also secured through gold, favors, and whispered counsel in the ears of the most powerful men in Christendom. The Knights Templar, with their sophisticated financial network, naturally gravitated towards the French crown, forging an alliance that would become both their greatest asset and their ultimate downfall. Their headquarters in Paris, known as the Temple, evolved into a fortified complex that was essentially the royal treasury. King Philip IV, aptly nicknamed Philip the Fair for his appearance but not his dealings, became deeply reliant on Templar financing. The order didn't just safeguard his wealth, they provided massive loans to fund his expensive wars against England and his ambitious projects to centralize royal power in France. This relationship placed the Templars at the very heart of French politics, giving them unprecedented influence. However, it also made them incredibly vulnerable. By the time Philip IV found himself deeply in debt to the order, he saw their immense wealth and independent power not as a service to his kingdom, but as an insult to his authority. Their close alliance had made them a target, and their financial prowess had painted a bullseye on their backs. The very influence they had cultivated in the French court would soon be used to orchestrate their destruction. The Hospitallers, perhaps learning from the Templars' precarious entanglement, pursued a more diversified and diplomatic strategy. They cultivated relationships with a wider array of European powers, ensuring they were not overly dependent on any single monarch. They found a particularly valuable patron in the Holy Roman Empire, a massive and fractured collection of states in Central Europe. The Hospitallers skillfully navigated the complex politics of the empire, offering their services as administrators, mediators, and military suppliers to various dukes and emperors. This broad base of support provided them with a crucial safety net. Later, during the Avignon Papacy, a 70-year period when the popes resided in France rather than Rome, the Hospitallers demonstrated remarkable diplomatic agility. While the French-dominated papal court could have been a hostile environment, the order adeptly managed its relations with the Avignon popes, securing confirmations of their privileges and even gaining support for their conquest of the island of Rhodes. This ability to adapt to shifting political sands, to maintain favor without becoming subservient, stood in stark contrast to the Templars' fateful alignment with a single, unpredictable patron. This European political maneuvering had a direct and often damaging impact on the crusading effort in the East. The orders frequently found themselves acting as proxies for their European patrons, their policies in the Holy Land reflecting the interests of Paris or the Holy Roman Emperor rather than the immediate needs of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. A Templar commander might oppose a truce with a Muslim leader because it conflicted with French strategic interests, while a Hospitaller might advocate for a military campaign that aligned with the goals of their German benefactors. This external politicking fragmented the already fragile unity of the Crusader states, often leading to paralysis and strategic blunders. The Grand Masters of both orders spent as much time sailing to Europe to plead their cases before kings and popes as they did leading their knights in the Levant, a testament to where the real sources of power now lay. In the end, this intense political game across Europe amplified the order's influence to dizzying heights, but it also fundamentally corrupted their original mission and made them powerful enemies. They had become players in a game far larger than the defense of pilgrims, and the stakes were no longer just territorial, they were existential. The Templars, in particular, discovered that being the banker to a king was a dangerous occupation when that king decided to cancel his debt with fire and steel. Their deep involvement in the secular politics of Europe, a natural extension of their rivalry for supremacy, had planted the seeds for the catastrophe that was about to unfold, proving that the most lethal threats often come not from declared enemies on the battlefield, but from supposed allies in the palace. Their divergent philosophies, forged in charity and combat, were not just abstract ideals, they were translated directly onto the battlefield, dictating two starkly different ways of waging war. The Templars and Hospitallers developed military doctrines that were perfect reflections of their core identities, turning every engagement into a physical manifestation of their rivalry. The Templar approach was one of overwhelming, disciplined ferocity. They believed in the decisive, annihilating blow, a concept that historian Malcolm Barber describes as their cult of the charge. Their knights were the special forces of their day, trained to execute complex maneuvers with chilling precision under the most chaotic conditions. A Templar charge was a sight designed to break enemy morale before a sword was even swung. They would advance in a tight, wedge-shaped formation, a steel-clad battering ram moving with an almost supernatural silence, as their rule forbade unnecessary noise or boastful war cries. Their initial impact was meant to be catastrophic, a concentrated explosion of force aimed at the enemy's command structure or a critical weak point in their lines. This tactic required immense courage and discipline, a willingness to plunge into the heart of the enemy with no guarantee of return. It was the ultimate expression of their warrior-monk ethos, victory through absolute commitment and sacred violence. Conversely, the Hospitaller way of war was one of resilient endurance and strategic patience. Having evolved from an organization that protected the sick and managed vast estates, their military thinking was inherently defensive and logistical. They were masters of the stronghold, experts in garrison warfare and the art of the siege. Their strategies emphasized holding ground, preserving resources, and winning through attrition rather than spectacular, high-risk assaults. On the open battlefield, this translated into a preference for combined arms tactics. While they fielded heavy knights as formidably armored as the Templars, they integrated them more carefully with supporting infantry, crossbowmen, and Turcopole's local light cavalry. The Hospitaller battle line was a more versatile and sustainable instrument, designed to absorb an attack and then counterpunch effectively. Their strength lay in their ability to maintain a cohesive front, to supply their forces over long periods, and to weather a storm. This was warfare as an extension of their Hospitaller mission, a protective, sustaining force that aimed to outlast its opponent. The cataclysmic Siege of Acre, which raged from 1189 to 1191, offers a stark window into how these differing doctrines played out under the immense pressure of total war. The 2-year struggle to capture the city was a grueling test of endurance, and the orders were constantly at the forefront. The Templars were often at the tip of the spear in the countless assaults on Acre's massive walls. They led bloody, desperate attempts to storm the fortifications, suffering horrific casualties in their attempts to achieve a breakthrough through sheer force of will. Their aggressive posture made them legendary but also left them perpetually exposed. The Hospitallers, meanwhile, were the backbone of the Christian camp. They used their logistical expertise to help maintain the siege lines, manage supplies for the vast army, and run field hospitals that treated the endless stream of wounded. Their military contributions were no less vital, but they were characterized by holding the line during Muslim counterattacks and providing the steady, grinding pressure that eventually wore the defenders down. The siege became a microcosm of their rivalry, the Templars seeking a decisive moment of glory, the Hospitallers contributing to the slow, inexorable process of victory. Perhaps the most famous demonstration of their tactical interplay occurred at the Battle of Arself in 1191 during the Third Crusade. Here, the legendary Richard the Lionheart found himself having to manage the competing instincts of his two most powerful contingents. As his army marched down the coast under constant harassment from Saladin's forces, the rules of engagement were clear. The main body was to maintain a defensive formation and not break rank. The Templars formed the vanguard and the Hospitallers the rear guard, the two most pressured positions. For hours, the Hospitallers in the rear bore the brunt of the attacks, holding their discipline under a hail of arrows. The tension between the desire to charge and the order to hold was immense. Finally, two Hospitaller knights could endure the taunts and pressure no longer and launched a localized countercharge. Seeing this break in discipline, the Marshal of the Hospitallers made a critical decision. He ordered the entire rearguard to charge to support them, knowing that to do nothing would mean their annihilation. This spontaneous action forced Richard's hand. He had to commit the entire army to the attack to prevent the Hospitallers from being isolated and destroyed. The result was a stunning Christian victory. The event is often told as a story of Richard's brilliant generalship, but it also perfectly illustrates the tactical DNA of each order. The Hospitallers, even in a charge, were reacting to pressure, fighting to stabilize a desperate situation. It was a defensive charge. One can only imagine the Templars in the van, chafing at the bit, waiting for the moment they were unleashed to deliver their own trademark offensive shock. Their contrasting roles in that single battle, the aggressive vanguard and the besieged but resilient rearguard, encapsulated the very essence of their military rivalry, a constant push and pull between the sword and the shield. Yet the battlefields and political arenas were only one front in this epic struggle. An equally fierce and perhaps more consequential war was being waged in the realm of economics. The rivalry between the Templars and Hospitallers extended far beyond clashing swords or whispered counsel in royal court. It was a relentless competition for financial supremacy that transformed them into the first true multinational corporations of the medieval world. Their economic duel was a complex game of thrones played with ledger books and trade contracts, where control over resources like grain, wool, and shipping lanes became just as vital as any fortress. This relentless drive for wealth was necessary to fund their colossal operations, but it also entangled them in a web of competition that often seemed at odds with their sacred vows, making them incredibly powerful and simultaneously deeply vulnerable to accusations of worldly greed. The Templars' financial innovation was nothing short of revolutionary, effectively inventing the concept of international banking. Their most famous creation, the letter of credit, solved a critical problem for the medieval traveler. A pilgrim or merchant could deposit their cash, a dangerous commodity to carry on bandit-ridden roads, at a Templar commandery in, say, London. In return, they received a coded letter detailing the amount. This letter was virtually worthless to a thief, but upon presentation at a Templar house in Jerusalem, the holder could receive the equivalent sum in local currency, minus a modest fee for the service. This system was not only secure but also brilliant, as it allowed the Templars to move vast sums of money across continents without ever physically transporting chests of gold, which were susceptible to theft and loss at sea. They became the bankers to the most powerful figures in Europe, managing the royal treasury of France, facilitating the transfer of papal taxes, and even holding the crown jewels of England as collateral for loans. Their Paris temple evolved into the financial center of Europe, a fortified vault where kings stored their wealth and negotiated loans to fund their wars and ambitions. This financial power granted the Templars immense influence, but it also cast them in a new, unsettling light. They were holy warriors who had also become the indispensable moneylenders to Christendom, a paradox that their enemies were quick to exploit. The Hospitallers, while also deeply involved in finance, built their economic empire on a broader, more tangible foundation of land and sea. They became masters of estate management, owning thousands of manors, farms, and vineyards across Europe. These agricultural holdings, donated by pious nobles seeking spiritual merit, generated a constant and massive stream of revenue in the form of crops, wool, and rents. This wealth was then funneled east to support their military and hospitaller operations, but their most significant economic adaptation was their pivot to maritime power. After establishing their headquarters on roads, they recognized that controlling the sea lanes was the key to both military defense and economic dominance. They built a powerful navy, not just to fight Ottoman fleets, but to police trade routes and extract tariffs from merchant vessels sailing between the Aegean and the Levant. They essentially became state-sponsored privateers, granting themselves the right to stop ships and demand a percentage of their cargo's value. This control over Mediterranean trade allowed them to tax the very lifeblood of commerce, creating a sustainable economic model that funded their survival for centuries after the Crusader states had fallen. Inevitably, the economic spheres of these two giants collided, leading to bitter disputes that required papal intervention. One flashpoint was the management of pilgrim traffic, the original source of their founding missions. Both orders ran hospices and offered guided, armed protection to pilgrims journeying from the coast to Jerusalem. This created a fierce competition for clients, as wealthier pilgrims would pay handsomely for safer passage and better accommodation. There are records of the two orders undercutting each other's prices and even arguing over the right to escort specific groups of nobles, turning a sacred journey into a commercial enterprise. Another major source of conflict was customs revenue. Key ports like Acre had customs houses that collected taxes on all imported goods, a lucrative income stream. The orders constantly jockeyed for control of these facilities, and chronicles tell of heated arguments between Templar and Hospitaller officials over the division of these funds, each accusing the other of withholding what was rightfully theirs. These public squabbles over money severely damaged their image, providing ample fodder for critics who accused them of hypocrisy, holy knights who had sworn poverty yet engaged in cutthroat capitalism. This economic warfare, while fueling their operations, ultimately painted a target on their backs, particularly for the Templars. Their secretive banking practices and immense, seemingly abstract wealth fostered an environment of suspicion and legend. People whispered about the source of their riches, questioning whether it came from divine favor or something more sinister. Their financial power made them indispensable to kings, but as those same kings, like Philip IV of France, found themselves drowning in debt to the order, that indispensability curdled into resentment and avarice. The Templars' economic prowess, the very engine of their strength, became the primary motive for their destruction. The Hospitallers, with their wealth more visibly tied to land and tangible services, presented a less mysterious and therefore less threatening target. Their economic strategy, diversified and rooted in both agriculture and controlled trade, proved to be the more sustainable model, ensuring their survival long after their rivals had been crushed by the very monarchs they had financed. Beyond the clash of steel and the whispers of conspiracy, the rivalry between the Templars and Hospitallers was etched into the very stone of medieval Europe and the Levant, shaping the daily lives and spiritual imaginations of countless people. Their cultural and social influence became another, far more subtle battlefield, where each order used architecture, patronage, and public service to project its power, legitimacy, and distinct vision of a holy society. This wasn't just a competition for land or money. It was a contest for the hearts and minds of Christendom, a struggle to define what it meant to be a knight of God, and their legacy in stone and symbol continues to captivate us today. The Knights Templar cultivated an aura of mystery and elite power, and their architectural footprint reflected this perfectly. Their most iconic contribution was the round church, a design directly inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The Temple Church in London, consecrated in 1185, stands as a magnificent example. Its round nave, intended to evoke the holiest site in Christendom, was not just a place of worship, it was a powerful statement of their direct connection to the sacred origins of their order. For a Londoner of the time, walking into that circular space, with its haunting effigies of knights on the cold floor, was an immersive experience of Templar prestige and mystique. They didn't just build churches, they constructed vast preceptories, fortified monastic complexes that served as regional headquarters, banks, and recruiting centers. These compounds, often built on prime land donated by nobles, were self-contained worlds of industry and devotion, projecting an image of immense, self-sufficient strength. This architectural secrecy fueled legends that persist to this day. Their sudden disappearance left behind these enigmatic structures, giving rise to tales of hidden tunnels, buried treasure beneath their chapels, and secret knowledge encoded in the carvings on their walls. The Templar cultural footprint was one of awe-inspiring, slightly intimidating power, a presence that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. In stark contrast, the Hospitallers built their cultural empire on a foundation of very public, very tangible charity. Their name was their mission, and they embedded it into the landscape of medieval Europe through a vast network of hospitals, hospices, and commanderies that were often the largest and most advanced medical facilities of their time. While the Templars' buildings evoked the distant Holy Land, the Hospitallers' structures served the immediate needs of their local communities. A traveler in need, whether a pilgrim, a pauper, or a wounded soldier, would know to seek out the house of the Hospital of St. John. These were not mere shelters, they were centers of medical innovation where the order's extensive knowledge in healing, from herbal remedies to rudimentary surgery, was put to use for the public good. This created an enduring legacy of practical compassion. Furthermore, when they established their sovereign state on the island of Rhodes, they didn't just build a fortress, they built a capital city. The Palace of the Grand Master in Rhodes is a breathtaking fusion of military might and administrative grandeur, but the city itself, with its fortified walls, hospitals, and inns for pilgrims, was a living testament to their blended identity. It was a functioning state built on the principles of defense and care, a physical manifestation of their belief that true power was demonstrated through sustained, benevolent service. This cultural rivalry extended beyond bricks and mortar into the very symbols they wore and promoted. The Templars' bold red cross on a white field was a symbol of martyrdom and militant faith, instantly recognizable and often carried at the forefront of charging armies. The Hospitallers' white, eight-pointed cross on a black mantle, later changed to red on white when on the battlefield, was a more complex emblem. Each of the 8 points was said to represent one of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, constantly reminding the wearer and the public of their foundational vows of charity. These symbols became brands, each communicating a different value proposition to medieval society. A nobleman leaving a bequest in his will had to choose: would his legacy support the formidable, mysterious protectors of the faith, or the merciful, public-facing healers of the sick? This choice, repeated thousands of times across Europe, was a quiet but constant referendum on their competing models of holiness. In the end, the most profound social impact of their rivalry was this very permeation into everyday life. For the average medieval person, the conflict wasn't about a distant argument between grand masters. It was about which order ran the local hospital, which one owned the land they farmed, which one's distinctive cross they saw on the tunics of knights passing through their town. The Templars offered the security of formidable, almost otherworldly power. The Hospitallers offered the comfort of tangible, accessible mercy. This cultural duel ensured that their struggle was not confined to the battlefields of the Holy Land or the throne rooms of kings. It was woven into the fabric of society itself, a constant, quiet competition for the soul of Christendom that played out in stone, symbol, and service. Yet this fierce economic and cultural competition was always overshadowed by the immense, shared responsibility they bore, the success or failure of the Crusades themselves. The holy wars to reclaim and defend Jerusalem provided the ultimate stage for their rivalry, a high-stakes environment where their cooperation was essential for survival, but their competition often sowed the seeds of disaster. From the First Crusade that established the Latin kingdoms to the final, feudal expeditions of the 13th century, the friction between the Templars and Hospitallers became a critical, and often damaging, factor in the fate of Christendom's grandest endeavor. Their interactions on campaign ranged from brilliant, coordinated defense to petty, self-serving squabbles that could derail an entire military operation. There were, without doubt, glorious moments of synergy that demonstrated what they could achieve when their formidable powers were combined. The Battle of Montjuic in 1177 stands as a shining example. There, the 16-year-old King Baldwin IV, despite being severely afflicted with leprosy, led a vastly outnumbered Christian force against the army of the great Saladin. In this desperate hour, the Templars and Hospitallers fought side by side not as rivals, but as a unified hammer and anvil. The Templars formed the core of the shocking cavalry charge that shattered Saladin's center, while the Hospitallers likely helped secure the flanks and manage the rear, their discipline ensuring the line held. Together, they contributed to a miraculous victory that saved the Kingdom of Jerusalem from an early collapse. It was a potent reminder that when their shared faith and purpose overcame their institutional pride, they were an almost unstoppable force. Tragically, such harmony was the exception rather than the rule. More often, their rivalry festered in the war councils and on the march, leading to catastrophic strategic disagreements. A telling pattern emerged where the orders would take opposing sides in the incessant political squabbles of the Crusader nobility, and then carry those divisions onto the battlefield. During the Fifth Crusade siege of the Egyptian city of Damietta, their competition for influence over the legate Pelagius, the papal commander of the crusade, led to paralyzing disputes over strategy. The Templars, often more cautious and aware of the local military reality, might argue for a tactical withdrawal or a carefully timed attack. The Hospitallers, perhaps seeking to secure a strategic advantage for their own future operations, might advocate for a bolder course. This created a fractured command structure where the overall Christian army rarely spoke with one voice, allowing a resilient enemy like the Ayyubids to exploit their indecision and disunity. Chroniclers of the time, like Oliver of Paderborn, often lamented this lack of unity, pointing to the selfish ambition of the great military orders as a primary cause for military stagnation and missed opportunities. The ultimate price for this discord was paid with the loss of the Holy City itself. The events leading up to the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187 are a textbook case of how internal rivalry can facilitate external defeat. In the years prior, the kingdom was bitterly divided between two rival factions vying for the crown. The Templars threw their immense weight behind one claimant, while the Hospitallers, along with other powerful barons, supported the other. This political schism, fueled by the Order's competition, prevented the formation of a unified front against the growing threat of Saladin. Critical resources that should have been spent reinforcing border fortresses were instead diverted to securing the internal political advantage. When Saladin finally invaded, the kingdom's defenses were fatally weakened by this infighting. The army that marched out to meet him at the Battle of Hattin was a divided force, its command structure muddled by suspicion and competing agendas. The result was the most crushing defeat in Crusader history, followed swiftly by the loss of Jerusalem. While Saladin's military genius was undeniable, contemporary sources are filled with accusations that the constant bickering and lack of cooperation between the military orders and the nobility made the disaster inevitable. This toxic dynamic persisted right to the bitter end. During the final Siege of Acre in 1291, the last major stronghold of the Crusader states, accounts describe a desperate defense hamstrung by a lack of coordination. While knights from both orders fought with legendary bravery on the walls, their high command was often at odds, disagreeing on sortie strategies, the allocation of men to the most threatened sectors, and even the distribution of supplies. This failure to present a perfectly united front in the face of annihilation contributed to the chaos and ultimately the fall of the city. The Mamluks breached the walls not just with siege engines, but through the cracks in the defenders' unity. The loss of Acre signaled the end of the Christian presence in the Holy Land, a monumental failure for which the military orders, despite their courage, must bear a portion of the blame. Their centuries-long struggle for primacy, which often placed their orders' prestige above the common good, had finally helped ensure the total collapse of the very cause they were created to serve. But beneath the public disputes and open warfare lay a far more shadowy world of clandestine deals and whispered betrayals, where the rivalry between the Templars and Hospitallers descended into the realm of medieval espionage and political sabotage. This was a Cold War fought in the dimly lit corridors of power, where a well-placed rumor or a deliberately withheld reinforcement could be more devastating than any cavalry charge. The chronicles of the time are filled with hints and allegations, painting a picture of a relationship so poisoned by mutual suspicion that each order often seemed to view the other as a greater threat than the Muslim armies they nominally fought together against. The 13th century chronicler Jean de Joinville, a man who campaigned alongside both orders during the Seventh Crusade, provides some of the most telling, albeit speculative, glimpses into this atmosphere of distrust. He recounts one particularly damning incident during the crusade of King Louis IX of France. As the French army found itself trapped and desperate in Egypt, a critical proposal was made to exchange the captured city of Damietta for the holy city of Jerusalem, a deal that would have been a monumental diplomatic and spiritual victory. According to Joinville, the Templars were secretly approached by the Sultan's emissaries with this offer. Instead of immediately bringing it to the king, the Grand Master allegedly discussed it only with the Hospitaller Grand Master. The Hospitaller, in a stunning act of inter-order rivalry, is said to have argued vehemently against the deal, not on strategic grounds, but out of fear that if the Templars were credited with brokering the return of Jerusalem, their prestige and power would eclipse that of the Hospitallers forever. Whether this story is entirely accurate or embellished by time and gossip, its persistence speaks volumes about the perception of their relationship, a rivalry so intense it could potentially scuttle the recovery of Christianity's most sacred site. This shadow play extended to the battlefield as well, where the failure to support a rival in combat could be disguised as a simple miscommunication or a prudent tactical decision. There are persistent whispers in the historical record of the Templars arriving late to relieve a Hospitaller garrison under siege, or of Hospitaller scouts failing to detect an ambush that subsequently decimated a Templar supply column. In one alleged episode during a campaign in the county of Tripoli, a combined force found itself surrounded. The Templar contingent, positioned on the flank, was said to have executed a disciplined fighting withdrawal, effectively abandoning the Hospitaller-led center to its fate. The Templars would have argued it was a necessary maneuver to prevent the entire army from being encircled, but to the Hospitallers who suffered devastating losses, it felt like a calculated betrayal, a chance to weaken a competitor under the fog of war. This kind of whispered accusation eroded all trust, meaning that even when genuine cooperation was essential for survival, commanders from both orders would second-guess each other's motives, hesitating at critical moments for fear of being strategically sacrificed. The flow of intelligence, the lifeblood of any military operation, became another weapon in their clandestine war. Controlling information meant controlling outcomes, and both orders maintained extensive networks of spies and informants across the Levant. It was an open secret that they sometimes used these networks against each other. A Hospitaller commander might learn of a vulnerable Templar supply caravan from a local trader and conveniently neglect to pass the information along, allowing it to be plundered. More dangerously, there were rumors of deliberate leaks of a Hospitaller agent subtly passing information about a planned Templar raid to a neutral intermediary, knowing it would eventually reach Muslim ears. The goal was not to ensure the Templars' destruction, but to see them bloodied and humbled, to make them appear incompetent in the eyes of their royal patrons. This politicization of intelligence had devastating consequences beyond their feud, as it fragmented the Christian understanding of their enemies' movements and intentions. A Muslim commander could exploit this division, feeding false information to one order in the confidence that it would never be cross-referenced with the other, turning their rivalry into a strategic asset for the very forces they were supposed to be fighting. This environment of perpetual suspicion and backroom dealing fundamentally altered their posture in the world. The Templars, in particular, retreated further into their culture of secrecy, trusting fewer and fewer outsiders and hoarding their knowledge and wealth within their fortified preceptories. This isolation, while perhaps feeling like a necessary defense against rivals, made them appear arrogant and sinister to the outside world, painting a target on their backs for kings who already saw them as a state within a state. The Hospitallers, though also guilty of these shadow games, managed their reputation more adeptly, their public charitable works providing a durable shield against the worst accusations. The constant, grinding treachery between them had a corrosive effect that weakened both orders from within, sapping the collective strength of the Crusader states at a time when unity was their only possible salvation. In the end, their obsession with undermining each other made them blind to the much larger threats gathering force beyond their narrow field of vision, leaving them vulnerable to external enemies who needed no secret alliances to see the value in destroying them both. The very secrecy and financial power that had made the Templars indispensable ultimately became the instruments of their ruin. While their rivalry with the Hospitallers had preoccupied them for over a century, a far more dangerous threat was coalescing in the court of King Philip IV of France. Philip, nicknamed the Fair for his looks but not his character, was a monarch drowning in debt, much of it owed to the Templars for his wars against England and Flanders. He saw the order not as a valuable financial partner, but as an arrogant state within his state, an entity with more wealth, power, and independence than he could tolerate. Their secretive nature, a core part of their identity, had bred an atmosphere of suspicion and dark legend, making them vulnerable to outrageous accusations. In contrast, the Hospitallers' very public mission of charity provided them with a shield of popular goodwill and moral authority that the Templars simply lacked. Philip recognized this disparity and exploited it with ruthless precision. The king's plan was a masterpiece of political treachery. On Friday, October 13, 1307, he launched a perfectly coordinated surprise attack across his entire kingdom. His officials, armed with sealed orders, opened simultaneously at dawn, arrested hundreds of Templars, including the order's Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The charges were shocking, deliberately designed to provoke maximum outrage. Heresy, blasphemy, sodomy, and idol worship specifically. The accusation that Templars spat on the cross during their initiation rites and worshipped a mysterious head known as Baphomet. These claims were almost certainly fabrications, but they were terrifyingly effective propaganda. Philip had secured the cooperation of a weak and pliant pope, Clement V, by threatening to bring charges of heresy against the papacy itself, ensuring the church would not immediately intervene to protect its most powerful military order. What followed was a grotesque perversion of justice designed to produce only one outcome: conviction. The Templars were subjected to brutal torture by agents of the king, not to discover the truth, but to extract the confessions needed to justify their destruction. The methods were horrific. Men were stretched on the rack, had their feet roasted over fires, or were suspended from their arms dislocated behind their backs. Under this unimaginable agony, many Templars, including Jacques de Molay, initially confessed to the absurd charges. These forced admissions were then used by Philip to pressure Pope Clement into authorizing further investigations across Europe, tarnishing the order's reputation internationally. Even when hundreds of Templars later recanted their confessions, declaring they had spoken only to end the torture, it was too late. The machinery of their destruction was already in motion. The Hospitallers watched this catastrophe unfold from a cautious distance. They offered no public defense of their rivals, a silence that speaks volumes about the depth of their estrangement. In fact, they quietly maneuvered to benefit from the Templars' misfortune, successfully petitioning for the transfer of many of their rivals' former properties and assets to their own control. Their survival strategy was a masterclass in contrast. Where the Templars were secretive, the Hospitallers were publicly charitable. Where the Templars were primarily financiers, the Hospitallers were seen as caregivers and defenders. This transparent, service-oriented image made them a far more difficult target for a king reliant on public opinion. Philip could not easily accuse the order that ran hospitals and cared for the poor of the same grotesque sins he pinned on the mysterious bankers of the temple. The final act came in 1312 at the Council of Vienne. Under immense pressure from King Philip, Pope Clement V issued the bull Vox in Excelso, formally suppressing the order of the Knights Templar. The bull did not condemn the order outright, citing a lack of sufficient evidence for a definitive guilty verdict, but stated that the Templars' reputation was so irreparably damaged that they could no longer serve any useful purpose. Their vast wealth, the very object of Philip's desire, was officially transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, though the French king managed to seize a significant portion for himself to settle his debts. The tragedy reached its grim conclusion in March 1314, when the aged Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the preceptor of Normandy, Geoffroy de Charny, were burned at the stake in Paris after retracting their forced confessions. It was a chilling lesson in the dangers of unchecked power and the vulnerability that comes from isolation. The Templars, for all their martial prowess and financial genius, had forgotten to nurture the alliances that could have saved them, their focus narrowed by their long rivalry until they failed to see the king sharpening his axe just behind them. While the Templars were being crushed by the combined might of a king and a pope, the Hospitallers faced a moment of profound existential crisis. The loss of the Holy Land had rendered their original purpose obsolete, and the shocking destruction of their greatest rival served as a brutal warning about the perils of inflexibility. Yet, where the Templars met their end, the Hospitallers embarked on a breathtaking reinvention. Their survival was not a matter of luck. It was a masterclass in strategic adaptation, a demonstration of an institutional resilience that their rivals tragically lacked. They understood that to remain relevant, they must fundamentally transform not just their location, but their entire identity, evolving from land-based knights into the masters of the Mediterranean Sea. Their first great leap was the audacious conquest of the island of Rhodes. In 1309, led by the dynamic Grandmaster Fawkes de Villaret, the Order launched a sustained campaign against the Byzantine garrison, finally seizing control of the island and its surrounding archipelago. This was a monumental strategic shift. They were no longer just tenants of castles in someone else's kingdom. They had become a sovereign naval state. Rhodes provided a perfect defensive stronghold and an ideal base for their new primary mission, maritime warfare. They built a powerful fleet of war galleys and dedicated themselves to policing the eastern Mediterranean, becoming the scourge of Muslim shipping and a persistent thorn in the side of the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. This pivot from heavy cavalry to naval power was as radical as a modern army switching from tanks to an air force. It required new skills, new technology, and a completely new mindset. They became experts in naval combat, piracy, and amphibious assaults, their knights exchanging their war horses for the decks of war galleys. This ability to so completely redefine their military function ensured they still had a vital role to play in the defense of Christendom long after the crusading ideal had faded. Their ultimate test, and the event that would cement their legend for centuries, was the Great Siege of Malta in 1565. By this time, the Order had been forced from Rhodes by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, and had been granted the barren islands of Malta as their new sovereign home. The Ottomans, viewing the Hospitallers as a persistent nuisance, decided to eradicate them once and for all, sending an enormous invasion force of nearly 40,000 elite troops. Facing them were just 600 knights and around 7,000 local militia and mercenaries. What followed was one of the most brutal and iconic sieges in military history. For over 3 months, the knights, under the steadfast leadership of Grandmaster Jean Parisot de Valette, endured relentless bombardment, starvation, disease, and countless mass assaults. They fought from fortified lines, in crumbling breaches, and in the streets of their own towns, embodying a spirit of desperate resistance. The siege was a grueling war of attrition, and the Hospitallers' famed logistical skill and medical expertise became as important as their courage. Their hospitals, true to their name, worked tirelessly to save the wounded, while their careful management of scarce supplies like food and water stretched their endurance to the absolute limit. The final victory, achieved against unimaginable odds, was a seismic event in European history. It halted Ottoman expansion into the Western Mediterranean and transformed the Knights Hospitaller, now often called the Knights of Malta, into legendary heroes. Their triumph was not just a military victory, it was the ultimate validation of their ability to adapt, endure, and remain indispensable. The key to their incredible longevity lay in this very blend of tradition and flexibility. They never abandoned their core identity, their vows, their 8-pointed cross, or their commitment to caring for the sick. Their infirmary in Malta became one of the finest hospitals in Europe, renowned for its advanced care and its treatment of patients from all faiths. This unwavering dedication to their founding humanitarian principle provided them with a powerful moral legitimacy and a constant source of popular support that the more secretive Templars had forfeited. Yet they were utterly pragmatic in how they fulfilled that mission. They adapted their warfare, their economy, and their diplomacy to the changing times. They became a hybrid institution, part navy, part humanitarian organization, part sovereign state. This duality allowed them to weather political storms that shattered other orders. When the Protestant Reformation divided Europe, the exclusively Catholic Hospitallers managed to maintain diplomatic relations and receive donations from Protestant kingdoms like England, a testament to their perceived value as a bulwark against Ottoman power. Their resilience offers a timeless lesson. Institutions that survive for centuries are not those that remain static, but those that hold fast to their core purpose while fearlessly evolving their methods to meet the demands of a new world. History, especially when it involves secretive and powerful organizations, has a curious way of vanishing into the fog of myth and legend, and the rivalry between the Templars and Hospitallers has proven to be one of the most fertile grounds for fantastic speculation the world has ever known. Long after the last Templar was executed and the Hospitallers had settled in Malta, their story was not finished. It was simply handed over from historians to storytellers, where it grew into a sprawling tapestry of conspiracy, hidden treasures, and occult secrets. This mythological layer, while captivating, often obscures the true, equally dramatic history of their struggle, replacing nuanced human conflict with tales of supernatural intrigue and shadowy cabals. Perhaps the most persistent and alluring legend is that of the lost Templar treasure. When the order was suppressed, King Philip's agents famously found the Paris temple treasury empty, a moment that instantly ignited centuries of speculation. Where did the wealth of Europe's first international bankers go? The myths offer 1,000 answers. Some say it was smuggled to Scotland in the night before the arrests, hidden away in Rosslyn Chapel, and used to fund the Stuart cause. Others claim it crossed the ocean, buried on Oak Island in Nova Scotia, protected by a series of ingenious booby traps that have tantalized and thwarted treasure hunters for over 2 centuries. Another branch of the legend suggests the treasure was not merely gold, but something far more precious, sacred relics like the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, discovered by the knights during their excavations on the Temple Mount and hidden away to protect their immense spiritual power. These stories transform the Templars from financiers into guardians of ultimate secrets, a shift that says more about our modern fascination with hidden knowledge than it does about historical reality. The Hospitallers, though less central to treasure myths, are often woven into these tales as rivals in a never-ending secret war. Legends speak of a centuries-long Cold War between the two orders, continuing long after their official rivalry ended. Some conspiracy theories suggest that the Hospitallers, envious of the Templars' rumored discoveries, actually facilitated their downfall to seize these artifacts for themselves. Others propose that a secret pact was formed, and that a core group of surviving Templars went underground, eventually merging with the Hospitaller order to continue their work from within, guiding world events from the shadows. This idea of a perpetual, hidden conflict between two immortal ideologies is incredibly powerful, providing a simple, grand narrative for the complex and often random nature of history. Modern literature has been instrumental in cementing these myths in the popular imagination. Umberto Eco's brilliant novel Foucault's Pendulum is a masterful dissection of this very process, showing how a handful of historical facts about the Templars can be endlessly recombined and connected to every conspiracy under the sun, from the Rosicrucians to the Illuminati, until all of history becomes a single cryptic message. While Eco's book is a satire meant to warn against the addictive allure of such thinking, It ironically provided a sophisticated roadmap for future conspiracy theorists. Later works, most notably Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, took these ideas and streamlined them into a global phenomenon, presenting a version of history where the Templars were not destroyed but transformed into a secret society protecting the bloodline of Christ. In these narratives, the historical Hospitallers are often reduced to bit players or replaced entirely by the fictional Opus Dei, but the core idea of an ancient, powerful struggle between secretive groups remains, directly descended from the real tensions between the two orders. The appeal of these myths is undeniable. They offer a more thrilling and orderly version of the past, one where nothing is accidental and everything is connected by a grand, hidden design. The messy, human reality of the Rivalry, a story of pride, financial competition, and strategic disagreement, is less satisfying than a tale involving sacred geometry, lost gospels, and global conspiracies. These legends grant the Templars and Hospitallers a form of immortality, ensuring they remain relevant figures in our cultural conversation. However, the cost of this immortality is a distorted understanding of their true significance. The real drama lies not in imagined occult secrets, but in the tangible ways these two institutions shaped the medieval world through their very human ambitions. Their authentic story of how faith, power, and rivalry can alter the course of history is in many ways more remarkable than any fiction, a compelling testament to the fact that the truth needs no embellishment to be utterly captivating. The epic struggle between the Templars and Hospitallers has not been confined to the dusty pages of history books. It has exploded onto our screens, leaped from our novels, and become a playground for modern storytellers. This centuries-old rivalry provides the perfect cocktail of elements for compelling fiction: secretive brotherhoods, sacred relics, and a shadow war fought behind the scenes of known history. From the blockbuster video game series Assassin's Creed to the labyrinthine plots of Dan Brown's novels, the conflict is often reframed as a cosmic battle between freedom and control, or between hidden truths and orthodox lies. In Assassin's Creed, the Templars are reimagined as the ultimate villains of history, a cabal of cold, calculating oligarchs seeking to impose absolute order on a chaotic humanity. Their eternal opponents, the Assassins, embody a philosophy of radical free will, making the ancient struggle feel like a proxy for modern debates about security versus privacy and control versus liberty. The historical Hospitallers are often folded into this broader Templar antagonist role, their nuanced identity simplified into a monolithic force of oppression. This is history as a grand, thrilling canvas, where the complex motivations of faith and land are swapped for a more easily digestible, high-stakes science fiction narrative. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code and the broader genre it inspired took a different but equally impactful approach. Here, the Templars are not just powerful bankers, but the guardians of the world's most explosive secret, the purported bloodline of Jesus Christ. Their sudden destruction by King Philip and the Pope is reinterpreted not as a financial shakedown, but as a desperate church-led cover-up to suppress a truth that would undermine its very foundation. The real rivalry with the Hospitallers is often sidelined in these stories, replaced by a broader conspiracy against the church itself. These narratives tap into a deep public fascination with alternative history, and the idea that everything we've been taught is a lie, curated by powerful institutions. The Templars become romanticized victims, martyrs for a hidden truth, a far cry from the pragmatic and sometimes ruthlessly ambitious military order they actually were. So why does this particular historical feud resonate so powerfully with a 21st century audience? The answer lies in its timeless themes. At its heart, their story is about the corrupting nature of power. We see two organizations, both founded on the purest ideals of service and faith, gradually seduced by wealth and influence until they are virtually indistinguishable from the secular powers they were meant to serve. This arc feels incredibly relevant in an era of growing skepticism toward large institutions, multinational corporations, and the blending of wealth and ideology. Their rivalry is a medieval precursor to the competition between modern tech giants or corporate empires, each claiming to make the world a better while simultaneously battling for market dominance and political sway. It's a cautionary tale about how even the most noble mission can be twisted by ambition. Furthermore, the secretive nature of both orders, particularly the Templars, provides a blank slate for our imaginations. Their closed ceremonies, their famous vows of silence, and the sudden, dramatic nature of their downfall create perfect conditions for myth-making. We are compelled to fill in the gaps, to imagine what secrets they were really keeping. Were they heretics, guardians of a lost treasure, possessors of ancient knowledge? This mystery allows every generation to project its own anxieties and fantasies onto them, turning the Templars and Hospitallers into mirrors for our own culture's preoccupations with conspiracy, hidden knowledge, and the struggle against seemingly omnipotent forces. However, this pop culture dominance comes with a significant cost, the obscuring of historical reality. For millions, their understanding of these orders begins and ends with these fictionalized accounts. The nuanced, decades-long political maneuvering, the genuine theological devotion that underpinned their actions, and the complex economic reasons for their conflict are often swept aside in favor of a more melodramatic narrative. The Hospitallers, in particular, suffer from this, frequently being reduced to a footnote or simply merged into a generic Templar villain role. Their incredible story of adaptation and survival, from Jerusalem to Rhodes to Malta, is often overlooked in favor of the more sensational and tragic tale of the Templars' destruction. This doesn't diminish the power of the stories we tell, but it reminds us that history is often more complex, more human, and in many ways more interesting than the legends we build upon it. The enduring allure of their struggle proves that these two medieval orders stumbled upon a narrative that feels perpetually modern, a timeless drama of ideals compromised, power contested, and the endless human fascination with what might be hiding just behind the curtain of the accepted story. The centuries-long struggle between the Templars and Hospitallers offers far more than a thrilling historical narrative. It provides a timeless case study in leadership and organizational strategy, rich with lessons that resonate powerfully in our modern world. Their story is a masterclass in the delicate balance required to sustain power, illustrating how even the most noble institutions can be undone by their own strengths when taken to an extreme. The Templars' catastrophic fall and the Hospitallers' remarkable resilience serve as a stark contrast, highlighting principles of adaptability, strategic transparency, and the perils of overreach that are as relevant to today's corporate boardrooms and political arenas as they were to medieval courts. Perhaps the most critical lesson is the imperative of adaptability. The Hospitallers demonstrated a breathtaking capacity for reinvention that became their greatest asset. When the Crusader states collapsed, rendering their original purpose obsolete, they didn't cling to a fading identity. Instead, they audaciously pivoted, conquering Rhodes and transforming from a land-based knighthood into a sovereign naval power. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a complete strategic overhaul, requiring new skills, new technology, and a new raison d'etre. They became masters of the sea, understanding that their survival depended on offering continued value to Christendom in a new form. The Templars, in stark contrast, failed to adapt. Their immense wealth and power were tied to a specific model, banking and landholding in a Crusader context, that became obsolete almost overnight. Their rigid structure and secretive culture left them isolated and unable to pivot when the political winds shifted violently against them. Their story is a powerful warning that no amount of past success can inoculate an organization against the necessity of change. In any era, the ability to anticipate seismic shifts and courageously redefine one's mission is the ultimate hallmark of enduring leadership. This leads directly to the danger of overreach, a trap the Templars fell into with devastating consequences. Their incredible financial success sowed the seeds of their destruction. By becoming the bankers to kings and amassing wealth that rivaled nations, they created powerful dependencies but also fostered immense resentment and envy. King Philip IV of France didn't destroy them because he believed the outlandish charges of heresy. He destroyed them because he was deeply in their debt and coveted their treasure. The Templars' overreach was a failure to manage their stakeholders. They believed their financial indispensability and papal protection made them untouchable, blinding them to the growing threat in the French court. They forgot that power, especially financial power, must be managed with humility and a keen awareness of how it is perceived by those outside the organization. A modern parallel might be a tech giant that grows so vast and influential it attracts the unwanted attention of regulators and governments. The lesson is clear: unchecked growth and a lack of diplomatic engagement with the broader ecosystem can create vulnerabilities that are existential. Finally, their rivalry underscores the vital balance between secrecy and transparency. The Templars' culture of secrecy was a source of strength, fostering internal discipline and trust, but it ultimately became a critical weakness. Their closed ranks and mysterious rituals bred suspicion, allowing their enemies to fabricate believable lies about blasphemy and conspiracy. They offered the outside world no compelling narrative to counter the accusations because they had spent centuries building walls instead of bridges. The Hospitallers, while also a disciplined military order, maintained a powerful brand of transparency through their very public, charitable works. Their hospitals, which cared for the sick of all faiths, generated a deep reservoir of public goodwill and moral authority. This transparency acted as a shield. It was far more difficult for a king to convincingly accuse the order that ran renowned hospitals of the same grotesque sins he could pin on the secretive bankers. For leaders today, this translates to the importance of building trust through open communication and demonstrable value. A culture of extreme secrecy might protect short-term advantages, but it builds a foundation of suspicion that can be easily exploited by adversaries. The most resilient organizations understand that their social license to operate is maintained not just by their power, but by their perceived integrity and contribution to the common good. Ultimately, the saga of these two great orders is a profound study in strategic foresight. The Hospitallers consistently played the long game, diversifying their alliances, adapting their capabilities, and maintaining their public legitimacy. The Templars, for all their brilliance, optimized for short-term power and influence, a strategy that left them exquisitely vulnerable when the political landscape suddenly changed. Their story teaches us that true leadership is about navigating the tension between strength and humility, between competition and cooperation, and between protecting core secrets and building public trust. These knights of old were grappling with challenges that are remarkably familiar, proving that the fundamental dynamics of power, strategy, and survival are indeed timeless. For centuries, the epic struggle between the Templars and Hospitallers existed primarily in the pages of chronicles and letters, a narrative shaped by the biases of medieval scribes and the romanticism of modern storytellers. But what happens when we move beyond the text and into the earth itself? archaeology provides the physical, tangible evidence that grounds their rivalry in reality, transforming speculation into fact and offering breathtaking new insights into their complex relationship. Recent excavations at their fortresses, preceptories, and hospitals are peeling back the layers of time, revealing a story written not in ink, but in stone, bones, and forgotten artifacts. Consider the incredible discoveries at the Hospitaller headquarters in Acre, one of the final capitals of the Crusader kingdom. Here, archaeologists unearthed the Order's massive refectory, or dining hall, a monumental underground space that speaks volumes about their wealth and organizational prowess. But more tellingly, just a short distance away, the foundations of the Templar fortress revealed a starkly different architectural philosophy. The Templar complex was a veritable labyrinth of fortified towers, thick walls, and secluded chambers, designed for security and secrecy above all else. The physical proximity of these two headquarters, each built with such a divergent purpose, makes their rivalry palpable. You can almost feel the tension that must have existed in the crowded streets of Acre, as knights from each order, embodying these contrasting designs of openness and seclusion, passed one another with a nod that was perhaps less than cordial. Even more fascinating are the findings from rural commanderies across Europe. At a Templar preceptory in England, archaeologists analyzing soil samples and animal bones discovered evidence of highly efficient, centralized farming aimed at producing a surplus for cash export, fitting their role as economic innovators. Meanwhile, a comparative study of a nearby Hospitaller commandery showed a greater diversity of crops and evidence of larger-scale bread production and food storage, suggesting a focus on supplying their extensive hospital networks and providing local charity. These aren't just ancient farmsteads, they are silent testimony to their competing economic models, one optimized for profit and capital growth, the other for sustenance and charitable distribution. The very land they farm tells a story of two parallel systems operating in the same world with fundamentally different priorities. Perhaps the most dramatic evidence comes from the frontiers of the Crusader states. At the famous Crac des Chevaliers, a fortress so immense it was once thought to be unconquerable and long associated with the Hospitallers, recent analysis has revealed a more complex history. Workmanship on certain sections of the walls, along with distinctive mason's marks, suggests the Templars may have had a hand in its early construction or reinforcement before it was fully taken over by their rivals. This physical evidence hints at a possible, previously unknown period of collaboration or contested ownership, a subtle power struggle literally set in stone that was later erased from the historical record. It suggests their interactions were even more fluid and complex than documents alone can tell us. The discovery of personal artifacts adds a deeply human dimension to this centuries-old conflict. A lead seal found in the mud of the Thames River in London, stamped with the cross of a Templar knight, was used to authenticate documents and letters. Another seal, found in a French field, belonged to a Hospitaller official. These small, personal items are reminders that this wasn't just a clash of faceless institutions. It was a rivalry conducted by individuals sending orders, requests, and perhaps accusations across continents. In the ruins of a Hospitaller hospital in Jerusalem, the excavation of surgical instruments, fine scalpels, probes, and trepanning tools contrasts sharply with the overwhelming number of arrowheads and pieces of shattered sword blades found in the rubble of Templar outposts. These objects tell a silent but powerful story of their core identities, one order mending the wounds of war, the other inflicting them. Every trowel of dirt turned at these sites has the potential to rewrite a small piece of this story. Ground-penetrating radar is revealing the outlines of long-lost structures, allowing us to map the true scale of their operations. DNA analysis of skeletons found in Order cemeteries is helping us understand their diets, their origins, and the diseases they endured. Each fragment of pottery, each coin, each piece of shattered stained glass is a pixel in a gradually clarifying picture. This archaeological work does more than just confirm the historical accounts. It challenges them, enriches them, and often surprises us, proving that the epic struggle for influence between the Templars and Hospitallers is a history that is still being unearthed, one discovery at a time. The collapse of the Templars and the enduring transformation of the Hospitallers did not mark an end to their influence. Rather, it signaled the beginning of a profound and lasting legacy that would be adopted, adapted, and reinterpreted by countless organizations in the centuries that followed. Their unique fusion of martial discipline, religious devotion, and sophisticated international organization provided a powerful blueprint, a template that others would use to build institutions of their own, often for entirely new purposes. The echoes of their epic rivalry can be found in the most unexpected places, from the secret lodges of early modern Europe to the bustling emergency rooms of the modern world, proving that their struggles shaped far more than just the medieval landscape. Perhaps the most famous, and certainly the most debated, inheritance is the alleged connection between the Knights Templar and Freemasonry. Following the Order's sudden dissolution in the early 14th century, legends persisted that a core of surviving knights had gone underground, preserving their secrets and rituals. When speculative Freemasonry emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries, its emphasis on moral instruction through allegory, its graded degree system, and its use of architectural symbolism created a fertile ground for these Templar myths to take root. Masonic rites, particularly within the York and Scottish Rite traditions, began to incorporate degrees and titles explicitly linked to the Templars, such as the Order of the Temple within the Knights Templar degree. In this narrative, the Masonic Lodge became the spiritual successor to the Templar Preceptory, a place where the values of brotherhood, charity, and the pursuit of truth, values the Templars were believed to have embodied, could be preserved safe from the persecution of church and state. While historians largely agree there is no direct organizational lineage, the symbolic adoption was incredibly powerful. For Enlightenment-era men, the Templars became romantic symbols of esoteric knowledge and resistance against tyrannical authority, figures to be emulated in a new age of reason and revolution. This mythological link gave Freemasonry a deep historical gravitas and a narrative of continuity that persists to this day, a direct, if imaginative, echo of the Templar mystique. The Hospitaller legacy, by contrast, found its most powerful expression not in secret societies, but in the very public and practical world of humanitarian aid. Their model of providing impartial care to the sick and wounded, regardless of creed or origin, became a foundational principle for modern medical and relief organizations. The most direct descendant is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which continues its work today as a sovereign entity recognized by the United Nations, running medical missions and disaster relief programs across the globe. But the influence extends much further. The International Committee of the Red Cross, founded in the 19th century, operates on principles that would be deeply familiar to a Hospitaller Knight: neutrality, impartiality, and the mission to alleviate human suffering in the midst of conflict. Even the ethos of modern NGOs like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, which deliberately brings medical aid into the most dangerous war zones, channels the Hospitaller spirit of venturing into perilous territories to uphold a duty of care. The eight-pointed cross of the Hospitallers may have evolved, but its symbolic commitment to mercy in a world of violence has been adopted by countless organizations, that now form the backbone of international humanitarian law and action. Their influence also reshaped the very concept of the military order itself, providing a template that was eagerly seized upon by later powers. When the Iberian kingdoms of Spain and Portugal began their long reconquista to push Muslim rule from the peninsula, they established their own orders like Santiago, Calatrava, and Alcantara that were direct copies of the Templar Hospitaller model. These knightly brotherhoods combined monastic vows with military service, amassing lands and wealth that were crucial to funding the centuries-long campaign. Later, as European powers expanded overseas, they once again turned to this blueprint, the Order of Christ in Portugal, which was essentially the Templars reconstituted under a new name after their suppression, played a pivotal role in the Age of Discovery, funding and organizing the voyages of explorers like Vasco da Gama under its distinctive cross. Their infrastructure and wealth provided the capital for empire building, demonstrating how a medieval organizational structure could be adapted to fuel the dawn of the modern era. On a more philosophical level, the fundamental tension at the heart of their rivalry, the balance between the sword and the scalpel, between wielding power and serving compassion, established an enduring dialectic in Western thought about how to engage with a troubled world. The Templar model represents one pole, the belief that order and security are the prerequisites for peace, achieved through strength, discipline, and sometimes secrecy. This mindset echoes in the philosophies of realpolitik and in the strategies of modern security agencies. The Hospitaller model represents the opposite pole, the conviction that true strength is demonstrated through mercy, that healing and building are more powerful in the long run than conquering and destroying. This debate between hard and soft power, between military intervention and humanitarian aid, defines foreign policy discussions to this day. The Templars and Hospitallers, in their centuries-long struggle, acted out this fundamental conflict on a historical stage, providing a vivid and enduring case study that continues to inform how we think about resolving conflict and exerting influence in a complex world. Their story is a permanent part of our institutional DNA, a reminder that the structures we build and the ideals we champion are often inherited from a distant, dramatic past. While our image of these orders is dominated by armored knights, their sprawling operations relied on a vast and diverse network of individuals who never lifted a sword in combat, a reality that adds profound depth to our understanding of their societies. The Knights Hospitaller, true to their founding mission of care, formally incorporated communities of religious women known as the Sisters of the Hospital. These women were not peripheral figures, they were integral to the order's core identity, taking the same vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as the brothers, and serving as nurses, administrators, and caregivers within their extensive hospital system. In their main hospital in Jerusalem, and later in major centers across Europe, the sisters worked alongside male hospitallers, providing critical medical care, managing the day-to-day operations of the infirmaries, and offering spiritual comfort to the sick and dying. Their presence was a powerful testament to the order's commitment to its charitable work, demonstrating that the hands that healed were as vital as the hands that fought. The Templars, with their more rigidly militaristic and secretive structure, did not have an equivalent formal sisterhood, but women were still deeply connected to the order through other means. Noblewomen across Europe were among the Templars' most generous patrons, donating land, money, and resources to support their mission. More significantly, many women became consorors or donati associates who pledged themselves to the order without taking full vows. These women might live in communities near Templar preceptories, praying for the souls of the knights and contributing to the order's spiritual economy. In some cases, entire convents of nuns were placed under the spiritual protection and oversight of the Templars, binding them into the order's extended network. This system allowed women to participate in the Templar enterprise and benefit from its spiritual privileges, weaving a crucial thread of female support and devotion into the fabric of an otherwise male-dominated institution. Beyond gender, the orders relied on a whole ecosystem of non-combatants to function. Both the Templars and Hospitallers employed thousands of lay brothers, known as sergeants, who took simpler vows and served as men-at-arms, craftsmen, farmers, and stewards. They managed the vast agricultural estates that funded the order's operations, from harvesting wool in England to pressing olives in Sicily. Skilled artisans, masons to maintain their castles, blacksmiths to forge their weapons, and scribes to manage their complex international correspondence were essential to their daily existence. In the Holy Land, they also depended on local Eastern Christian and Muslim populations who often worked their lands, served as guides and translators, and provided crucial intelligence. The famous Turcopoles, light cavalry recruited from the local Christian population, formed a vital part of their military forces, acting as scouts and skirmishers. This inclusive reality challenges the simplistic, Hollywood-fueled narrative of the Crusades as a solely masculine domain of violence. It reveals the Templars and Hospitallers not as isolated military bastions, but as complex, multifaceted organizations that were deeply embedded within the broader social and economic fabric of medieval society. They were not just orders of knights, they were major employers, landowners, and providers of social services that engaged with people of all genders and backgrounds. Recognizing the vital roles played by women, sergeants, and local communities forces us to see these institutions in their full, rich complexity, moving beyond the myth of the solitary knight to understand the vast, collaborative human effort that truly sustained their epic struggle for influence. While both orders were unquestionably devout, sworn to the same pope, and dedicated to the defense of Christendom, a closer examination reveals a fascinating theological divergence that ran like a subtle fissure beneath their feet. Their shared faith was a foundation, but the structures they built upon it were shaped by distinctly different spiritual priorities, turning their religious practices into another quiet arena for their competition. The heart of this divide lay in how each order interpreted the concept of holy work. For the Knights Templar, the path to divine grace was paved with the righteous violence of the battlefield. They were the first order to fully embrace the radical idea of the Miles Christi, the soldier of Christ, who could achieve spiritual salvation not by retreating from the world into a monastery, but by cleansing it of unbelievers with his sword. Their spiritual life was organized around this militant ideal. A Templar's prayer was often the silent, focused preparation for combat. His chant was the crash of steel and the thunder of a cavalry charge. Their rule, the strict code that governed their lives, placed immense emphasis on obedience and discipline, the very qualities needed to maintain order in the chaos of war. A Templar knight did not see a contradiction between the monk and the warrior. In his mind, the two were perfectly fused. By shedding the blood of God's enemies, he was performing the highest form of prayer, an act of devotion that protected the faithful and expanded the realm of Christ. Their spirituality was intense, interior, and oriented towards a decisive, final victory achieved through force of arms. The Hospitallers, by contrast, walked a path that hewed much closer to traditional monastic roots, emphasizing the sanctity of mercy and charitable service. Their founding principle, drawn directly from the Gospel of Matthew, was the instruction to care for the sick, welcome the stranger, and clothe the needy. For them, holy work was not the act of killing an infidel, but of saving a life, regardless of that person's faith. Their famous hospitals were not mere appendages to their military function. They were the very soul of the order, the living expression of its theology. A Hospitaller's devotion was demonstrated through the grueling, unglamorous tasks of washing wounds, feeding the infirm, and praying over the dying. Their spiritual identity was rooted in the concept of Carita's selfless, Christian love, which they believed was a more powerful weapon in the long struggle for souls than any sword. This is powerfully symbolized by their 8-pointed cross, each point representing one of the 8 Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount: blessings for the poor, the meek, the peacemakers, and the merciful. Theirs was an outward-looking spirituality, focused on engagement with human suffering and the practical application of Christ's teachings. This theological schism inevitably manifested in their daily rituals and the atmosphere within their commanderies. A Templar preceptory would have been a place of stark discipline and purposeful silence, echoing with the sounds of military drills and the quiet murmur of prayers for victory. Their liturgies were likely more austere, emphasizing psalms that called for God's judgment upon enemies. A visitor to a Hospitaller house, however, would have encountered a vastly different scene. While still disciplined, the environment would have been more active and varied, filled with the movement of nurses, the sounds of patients, and the prayers for healing and comfort. Their liturgical calendar would have placed a special emphasis on saints associated with mercy and healing. These were not just different day jobs, they were different ways of being a religious knight, each order convinced that its method was the most pleasing to God and the most effective for the salvation of their own souls and the success of the crusading movement. This deep-seated belief in the superiority of their own spiritual path provided a constant, low-level justification for their rivalry. Every time a Templar looked at a Hospitaller, he might see a well-intentioned but naive brother who failed to grasp that evil must sometimes be met with overwhelming force. Every time a Hospitaller looked at a Templar, he might see a zealous but misguided soul who had forgotten that Christ's primary command was to love one's neighbor. Their competition for souls, resources, and influence was therefore not merely political or economic. It was, in their own minds, a theological contest for the right way to serve God in a fallen world. While their rivalry was fueled by ideology and ambition, it was profoundly shaped by the unyielding realities of the medieval landscape itself. The very earth beneath their feet, the scarcity of water, and the strategic value of a mountain pass were not just backdrops to their conflict. They were active, defining forces that dictated their strategies, fueled their economies, and often forced them into direct competition. Geography was the silent, omnipresent player in their drama, a merciless referee that rewarded those who could best read and control its rules. The starkly different environments they chose to dominate, the Templars in the bustling heart of urban power and the Hospitallers across vast rural territories, forged two distinct operational models that would define their relationship for centuries. The Knights Templar understood that true influence flowed along the same routes as gold and information, through the major urban centers. From the very beginning, they secured a headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, placing themselves at the spiritual and political epicenter of the Crusader world. This was no accident. Their financial genius required them to be where the money was. They established their most powerful preceptories in port cities like Acre, Tyre, and Tripoli, controlling the vital gates where pilgrims, merchants, and their wealth first arrived from Europe. Their dominance in these urban hubs gave them unparalleled access to royal courts, trading houses, and the complex web of international commerce. A Templar knight in Acre was not just a warrior, he was a banker, a diplomat, and a power broker, operating from a fortified compound that often functioned as the city's de facto treasury. Their urban strongholds were nodes in a vast network of economic and political power, allowing them to move money and exert influence with incredible speed and efficiency. This strategy, however, came with a critical vulnerability. By concentrating their power in cities, they tied their fate to the survival of those cities. When the Crusader states began to collapse and urban centers like Jerusalem and Acre fell, the Templars' physical and economic infrastructure was catastrophically dismantled, leaving them exposed and rootless. The Hospitallers, by contrast, built their power on a foundation of land. They became the great rural landowners of Outremer, amassing a patchwork of estates, farms, and villages that stretched across the countryside. Their strategy was one of depth and endurance, controlling not just points on a map but the very territories between them. This was brilliantly exemplified by their mastery of the Crac des Chevaliers. This wasn't merely a castle, it was the beating heart of a vast agricultural domain. From its commanding position, the Hospitallers controlled the surrounding plains, taxing the crops grown by local farmers, managing vast olive groves and wheat fields, and securing the vital trade routes that snaked through the mountainous region. Their rural focus made them experts in resource management, controlling water sources via intricate irrigation systems, managing grain storage, and overseeing the production of everything from wine to wool. This generated a more sustainable, though less flashy, form of wealth than the Templars' banking. While the Templars' urban wealth could vanish overnight with the capture of a single city, the Hospitallers' rural power base was more resilient, able to withstand the loss of individual strongholds because their economic foundation was spread across a wider area. Their strategy was to create a durable, self-sufficient territory that could feed itself and fund its own defense, a philosophy that would later enable their successful colonization of Rhodes and Malta. This geographical divergence inevitably led to fierce competition over the most precious resource in the arid Levant, water. In a land where rainfall was seasonal and unreliable, control over springs, rivers, and complex irrigation systems meant control over life itself. Disputes between the orders over water rights were common and intensely bitter. A chronicle might record a Templar garrison upstream from a Hospitaller mill deliberately diverting a water channel to deprive their rivals of power, or a Hospitaller commander refusing to allow Templar caravans access to a vital oasis without exorbitant payments. These were not petty squabbles, they were economic warfare waged with geography itself as the weapon. The ability to deny an opponent water could cripple their agricultural output, weaken their garrisons, and diminish their influence, making control of hydrology a key strategic objective every bit as important as capturing a castle. The very location of their greatest strongholds often tells the story of their rivalry. The Templars favored castles that dominated major roads and ports, prioritizing the control of movement and trade. Their fortress of Chateau Pellerin Castle Pilgrim, built on a coastal promontory, was virtually impregnable from the land and served as a crucial safe harbor for ships arriving from Europe. The Hospitallers, meanwhile, specialized in inland fortresses like the Crac des Chevaliers and Margat, which were designed to control entire regions. These were not isolated towers but vast, complex complexes with enough space to garrison hundreds of men, store harvests for years, and withstand prolonged sieges. They were the ultimate expression of a territorial strategy, projecting power over the countryside and creating zones of Hospitaller-controlled security. The placement of these castles often created a tense, overlapping patchwork of influence. A traveler journeying from the coast to the interior might pass from Templar-controlled roads to Hospitaller-patrolled territories, each change marked by a different standard flying from the castle on the hill, a constant physical reminder that the land itself was divided between two competing sovereign powers. This environmental context forces us to see their struggle not as an abstract political feud, but as a gritty, grounded conflict over the stuff of life itself: land, water, food, and the roads that connected them. Their drama was not just played out in council chambers and on battlefields. It was etched into the terraced hillsides, the guarded mountain passes, and the fiercely contested springs of the Holy Land. Yet for all their power as institutions, the epic struggle between the Templars and Hospitallers was never just a faceless clash of ideologies. It was a deeply human drama, fueled by the towering ambitions, fiery tempers, and personal vendettas of the men who led them. The Grand Masters were not mere administrators. They were princes of the church, generals of armies, and diplomats who moved in the circles of kings. Their personalities could either bridge the divide between the orders or set them ablaze, proving that even in a world governed by sacred vows, individual character could alter the destiny of nations. The personal rivalry between figures like Jacques de Molay and Fawkes de Villaret didn't just reflect the tension between their orders, it amplified it, turning strategic disagreements into bitter personal feuds that echoed across the Mediterranean. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, is a figure forever shrouded in the tragic aura of his order's downfall. Born in the French nobility around 1244, he rose through the Templar ranks not as a financier or a politician, but as a classic warrior knight, spending decades in the front-line combat of the dwindling Crusader states. By the time he was elected Grand Master in 1292, he was a seasoned veteran of the losing battle for Outremer, a man hardened by retreat and desperate for a decisive victory to restore his order's fading glory. This military background shaped his entire leadership. De Molay was often described as proud, stubborn, and fiercely protective of the Templars' privileges and independence. He viewed the world through the stark lens of a soldier, which made him a formidable commander but a tragically inept politician. He failed to perceive the shifting dangers in the courts of Europe, dismissing the avarice of King Philip IV as a distant nuisance while he focused on grand, but ultimately futile, military plans to retake the Holy Land. His personal rigidity and inability to cultivate the flexible diplomacy necessary for survival in that treacherous era made him the perfect tragic hero for the Templars' final act, a man whose very strength of character became his greatest weakness in the face of a cunning and ruthless adversary. That adversary, in many ways, was not just King Philip but his Hospitaller counterpart, Fawkes de Villaret. Where de Molay was a soldier, de Villaret was a visionary strategist and a master politician. As Grand Master of the Hospitallers from 1305, he possessed an ambition that was breathtaking in its scope. He recognized that the future of his order did not lie in clinging to the crumbling remnants of the mainland, but in seizing a new destiny entirely. His life's work became the audacious conquest of the island of Rhodes, a campaign he pursued with relentless determination. De Villaret was a man of immense energy and political skill, ruthlessly effective at rallying resources and men to his cause. He was also notoriously headstrong and authoritarian, even for a military Grand Master. His methods in financing the Rhodes campaign, including imposing heavy taxes on the Order's European holdings and allegedly selling commandery positions, generated significant internal opposition and even led to a brief revolt among his own knights. This contrast in leadership styles, de Molay's rigid, traditional militarism versus de Villaret's bold, calculating ambition, created a palpable friction. De Molay likely saw the Hospitaller's grand project as a distraction from the true holy war in the East, while de Villaret undoubtedly viewed the Templars as a relic, stubbornly tied to a lost cause. Their personal clash came to a head over the most critical strategic issue of the day: the proposed merger of the two military orders. For decades, popes and kings had floated the idea of uniting the Templars and Hospitallers into a single, more efficient and powerful entity to launch a new crusade. This proposal forced the Grand Masters into a direct and very public debate. Jacques de Molay vehemently opposed the merger, authoring a detailed memorandum that argued forcefully for the Templars' independence. His objections were practical and prideful. He believed the Templars' unique customs and military discipline would be diluted, and he was unwilling to surrender his order's glorious history and identity. Fawkes de Villaret, ever the pragmatist, was initially in favor of the union, likely seeing it as an opportunity to subsume the Templars' vast resources under his own leadership to fuel his Rhodes venture. Their disagreement played out in letters to the Pope and intense meetings, each man passionately defending his position. This was no longer an institutional policy difference. It was a deeply personal contest of wills between two proud leaders, each convinced his vision was the only path to salvation. De Villaret's eventual, grudging shift to opposition was likely less about agreeing with de Molay and more about realizing a merged order would be impossibly difficult for him to control. The human drama of their rivalry underscores a profound historical truth, that vast, impersonal forces are often channeled through the decisions of flawed and passionate individuals. Jacques de Molay's personal intransigence left the Templars isolated and vulnerable, unable to form the alliances that might have saved them. His fate, burned at the stake as a heretic after retracting a confession forced by torture, was a direct result of his character, a tragic end for a man who refused to bend. Fawkes de Villaret's relentless ambition, meanwhile, secured the Hospitallers a new future as a sovereign naval power, but his autocratic style nearly tore his own order apart in the process. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not just made by empires and economies, but by the choices of men driven by pride, vision, and the desire to etch their name into the world. The cold institutional rivalry between Templar and Hospitaller was given heat and life by the fire of these two men, whose personal struggle helped seal one order's doom and ensure the other's spectacular rebirth. Their fierce competition for influence inevitably spilled over into the hallowed halls of justice, transforming courtrooms and papal chambers into new battlegrounds for their ongoing feud. The very privileges that granted them independence from local bishops and kings, their direct answerability only to the Pope, also created a tangled and often contradictory web of legal authority. When a Templar and a Hospitaller clashed over a piece of land, a defaulted debt, or the right to collect taxes in a specific market, the question immediately arose who had the right to judge them. This jurisdictional ambiguity, a direct result of their unique status, forced medieval legal systems to adapt, creating new precedents that would resonate far beyond the two orders. One of the most common and disruptive legal battlefields was the dispute over property and tithes. A nobleman's pious bequest of a prosperous farm or a lucrative mill to one order could be instantly contested by the other, each producing charters, wills, or even earlier verbal promises to support their claim. These were not minor squabbles. The economic health of their entire operation depended on the revenue from such estates. A local bishop whose own diocese was starved of funds because the orders were exempt from paying tithes on their vast landholdings might be secretly inclined to favor one side over the other, further complicating the matter. These property disputes often ascended through the legal system all the way to the papal court itself, requiring the Pope to act as the ultimate arbiter between his two most powerful and most quarrelsome subjects. The rulings that emerged from these high-stakes cases helped to refine the medieval understanding of property law, setting stricter standards for evidence, the execution of wills, and the boundaries of ecclesiastical versus secular jurisdiction over land. The most sensational legal confrontations, however, involved the criminal jurisdiction over their own members. If a Templar sergeant was accused of a crime in a city like Acre, could the local royal court try him, or did the Templar master hold that power? The orders fiercely defended their right to try their own brothers in their own courts, arguing that their unique monastic military status placed them outside the reach of secular justice. This privilege, known as privilegium fori, was a cornerstone of their independence but a constant source of friction with local authorities. There are accounts of Templar officials literally storming a royal prison to free a brother who had been arrested by the king's marshal, arguing vehemently that the man was subject only to Templar law. These dramatic standoffs forced kings and popes to carefully define the limits of this legal immunity. They established that while the orders had the right to adjudicate internal matters and crimes committed within their own houses, serious offenses against outsiders, especially murder or treason, could indeed bring a knight before a secular court. This delicate compromise was a direct result of the constant pressure applied by the order's aggressive defense of their rights, carving out a new legal space for hybrid institutions that were both religious and military. Perhaps their most surprising contribution to legal history lies in the realm of trial procedure and the treatment of witnesses. The orders, with their international networks and sophisticated administrative structures, were pioneers in the use of written evidence. They maintained meticulous archives of charters, contracts, and correspondence, and they learned to deploy this paperwork with devastating effectiveness in legal disputes. A Hospitaller lawyer might travel from Jerusalem to Rome with a chest full of carefully sealed documents to prove his order's ancient right to a disputed toll bridge, setting a precedent for the power of organized record-keeping in the law. Furthermore, during internal investigations, for example, when a brother was accused of breaking his vows, the Templars and Hospitallers developed formalized processes for taking testimony from witnesses, often requiring multiple corroborating accounts before reaching a judgment. While far from modern standards of justice, these practices represented a move toward a more evidence-based and procedural approach than the trial by ordeal still common in some secular courts. Their immense wealth and power even allowed them to engage in a form of early legal lobbying, persuading popes to issue new bulls that clarified or expanded their legal privileges, effectively writing their own rules into the fabric of canon law. In this way, their relentless competition for every possible advantage didn't just use the legal system, it actively shaped it, turning their rivalry into an unexpected engine for legal innovation that would influence the development of Western justice for centuries to come. Beyond the clash of swords and the whisper of political intrigue, the rivalry between the Templars and Hospitallers was waged with brush, chisel, and wax. Their conflict was not merely physical or economic. It was a battle of symbols, a sophisticated propaganda war fought in the visual language of art and heraldry. Every fresco, every seal pressed onto a document, every banner fluttering above a castle tower was a deliberate statement of identity, a claim to legitimacy, and a subtle jab at their competitor. In an age of widespread illiteracy, these images were their public relations, their brand identity, and their theological manifesto, all rolled into one. The distinct symbols they cultivated were far more than decorative emblems. They were the Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter of their entire philosophy, designed to be instantly recognizable and to evoke a specific emotional response from friend and foe alike. The Templars' most iconic and enigmatic symbol was the image of two knights riding a single horse, famously embossed on their great seal. To the modern eye, it might seem like a simple illustration of their famed brotherhood or their vow of poverty, and on one level it was. The shared horse was a powerful, tangible representation of their early commitment to communal living and their lack of personal wealth, a stark contrast to the richly equipped secular knights of the era. But scholars have long debated deeper, more esoteric meanings. Some suggest it represents the dual nature of the Templar knight himself, the monk and the warrior, two identities fused into one man. Others propose it symbolizes the Order's foundational partnership, the first knights sharing everything in their holy mission. There's also a compelling theory that it harkens back to the very first 9 knights, implying that 4.5 pairs of knights were guarding the roads, a metaphorical representation of their small beginnings. This symbol, shrouded in a degree of intentional mystery, perfectly encapsulated the Templar brand, disciplined, unified, and profoundly secretive. It invited questions and inspired awe, reinforcing their image as an elite, closed brotherhood set apart from the ordinary world. Conversely, the Hospitalers' symbolism was designed for clarity and public service. Their 8-pointed cross, known as the Maltese cross, was a masterpiece of heraldic communication. Its meaning was explicitly theological and accessible to all. Each of the 8 points represented one of the 8 Beatitudes from Christ's Sermon on the Mount: blessings for the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and those who hunger for righteousness and endure persecution. This was not a hidden code. It was a public declaration of the virtues every Hospitaller knight was sworn to uphold. The cross itself, with its 4 V-shaped arms meeting at a central point, was also intensely practical. Its design was said to be ideal for a knight, as the indented arms could be broken off at the ends to create crude crosses for use in emergency field surgeries, tying directly back to their medical mission. Their use of color was equally significant. Initially, they wore a simple black mantle with a white cross, the black symbolizing the humility and penitence of their monastic calling. Later, when on campaign, they often wore a red surcoat with a white cross, making them easily distinguishable from the Templars' red cross on white on the chaotic battlefield. This shift demonstrates a keen awareness of their visual brand and its importance in the theater of war. This battle of images extended into their architectural patronage. The Templars, as befitted their role as bankers and power brokers, invested in structures that projected formidable strength and mystery. Their churches, most famously the round nave of the Temple Church in London, were not just places of worship but powerful political statements. By evoking the design of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, they were visually asserting their direct, privileged connection to the very heart of the Christian faith. The somber, imposing interiors, often lit by flickering torches and adorned with the effigies of their dead brothers, created an atmosphere of solemn gravity and secret knowledge. The Hospitallers, in contrast, built for light, air, and healing. Their architectural legacy is dominated by immense hospital halls, like the one in Jerusalem described by pilgrims as a palace of mercy, capable of housing thousands of patients. These structures were designed with high ceilings for ventilation, large windows for light, and spacious wards to promote cleanliness and order. Their buildings were their best advertisement, physical proof of their commitment to their founding mission of charity. A pilgrim would experience the Templars through the security of their armed escorts and the imposing sight of their fortified preceptories, but they would experience the Hospitallers through the comfort of their hospices and the care in their infirmaries. This architectural dichotomy was the ultimate expression of their rivalry in stone, one order building monuments to power and mystery, the other constructing monuments to service and compassion. Even their personal seals, used to authenticate documents, became miniature canvases for this ideological contest. A Templar knight seal might feature a solitary knight in prayer, a charging warhorse, or the iconic paired riders, emphasizing individual devotion and military readiness. A Hospitaller's seal was far more likely to depict a scene of charity, such as the Grand Master washing the feet of the poor, a direct imitation of Christ, or a patient receiving care in a bed. These small, personal stamps were seen by everyone who handled their correspondence, constantly reinforcing their chosen brand identity to kings, popes, and fellow knights. This relentless visual campaigning ensured that their rivalry was never out of sight. It was etched into the wax of every legal document, woven into the fabric of their mantles, painted on the walls of their chapels, and carved into the stone of their mighty fortresses. Long after their voices fell silent, this artistic legacy continues to speak, telling the story of two very different visions of holy knighthood locked in a centuries-long struggle for the soul of Christendom. Yet for all the bitterness of their competition, the relationship between the Templars and Hospitallers was never a simple story of pure hatred. Beneath the surface of their fierce rivalry lay a more complex and pragmatic truth. They were bound together by a shared faith, a common enemy, and the stark realization that in the perilous world of the Crusader states, their survival sometimes depended on cooperation. There were critical moments, often in the face of imminent annihilation, when the orders would set aside their disputes and unite their strength, proving that even the most bitter rivals can find common cause when the stakes are the survival of everything they hold dear. These unspoken truces and fragile collaborations add an essential layer of nuance to their story, revealing a relationship built not just on conflict, but on a grudging, necessary respect. The most powerful catalyst for this temporary unity was the sheer, overwhelming force of a Muslim army on the march. When a figure like Saladin or later, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars, threatened to wipe the Christian presence from the map, the luxury of inter-order squabbling instantly vanished. The survival of the entire Latin East took precedence over any dispute over a mill or a border stronghold. During the great battles, we often find their knights fighting shoulder to shoulder in the battle line, their distinctive red on white and white on red crosses forming a united Christian front. At the Battle of Arself in 1191, despite the tensions that led to the Hospitaller charge, the overall Christian victory was only possible because both orders, along with the rest of Richard the Lionheart's army, fought as a cohesive whole against Saladin's forces. Their disciplined heavy cavalry, though employing different doctrines, formed a hammer blow that the Muslim armies struggled to withstand. In the desperate defense of cities during a siege, the orders would routinely be assigned to guard adjacent sections of the wall, their combined martial skill creating a formidable barrier that was far more effective than either could have managed alone. The shared experience of standing watch through a long night under a hail of Greek fire, or repelling a ladder assault at dawn, created a powerful, unspoken bond between the common sergeants and knights of both orders, a bond that often transcended the political maneuvering of their distant grand masters. Beyond the battlefield, there is evidence of quieter, more mundane cooperation that kept the fragile Crusader society functioning. In the sprawling port city of Acre, the orders maintained their separate, mighty fortresses, but they existed within a shared ecosystem. It is likely that their officials coordinated on matters of city defense, policing, and even the management of the crowded, volatile markets where pilgrims and merchants from across the world mingled. During times of famine or plague, which were devastatingly common, the Hospitallers' extensive medical expertise and the Templars' sophisticated logistical networks might have been informally combined to distribute food and care for the suffering population, a humanitarian effort that benefited everyone. There are even hints in the financial records of the time of limited, pragmatic business dealings. A Templar preceptory in France might contract with a nearby Hospitaller commandery for a shipment of wool, or the two orders might reluctantly agree to jointly fund the repair of a bridge vital to regional trade. These everyday interactions reveal a world where the two giants could not simply ignore each other. They had to find a way to coexist and even cooperate within the same small space, their institutional rivalry constantly tempered by the practical necessities of daily life. The most telling evidence of this complex relationship comes from the highest levels of leadership. Despite their frequent disputes, the Grand Masters of both orders would meet in the Royal Council of Jerusalem, where they were forced to debate strategy and policy as peers. In these chambers, they had to look past their differences and acknowledge the other's expertise. The Templars' grasp of military intelligence and finance, the Hospitallers' understanding of logistics and long-term garrison warfare. There are instances where they presented a unified front to the king, jointly advocating for a specific course of action that they both believed was in the best interest of the kingdom's defense. Furthermore, when a new Grand Master was elected, it was customary for the other order to send a delegation to offer formal congratulations and pledges of continued cooperation for the common good. These were not empty gestures, they were vital diplomatic rituals that maintained an essential line of communication and a baseline of civility, ensuring that their competition never devolved into open civil war. This grudging mutual respect, born from the recognition that the other order was an equally dedicated and powerful instrument of God's will, was the thin thread that prevented their rivalry from tearing the Crusader states completely apart. It was a constant, tense balancing act between the instinct to compete and the imperative to cooperate, a dynamic that reminds us that history is rarely a simple tale of black and white, but is instead painted in countless shades of gray. And so we reach the end of our journey through one of history's most captivating and complex rivalries. The epic struggle between the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller was never a simple story of good versus evil, but rather a multifaceted clash of ideologies, a relentless competition for wealth, and a brutal contest for power that fundamentally reshaped the medieval world. From their humble beginnings as protectors and healers on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem, these two orders grew into international superpowers, their fates intertwined in a dance of cooperation and conflict that spanned centuries. We've seen how their philosophical divide, the Templars' path of sacred violence versus the Hospitallers' mission of merciful service, fueled a Cold War that played out on battlefields, in royal courts, and across the economic landscapes of Europe and the Levant. Their story is a powerful testament to how even those sworn to the same highest ideals can become locked in a struggle for supremacy, where ambition and institutional pride can sometimes overshadow a shared sacred cause. This forgotten conflict offers us profound, timeless lessons that echo far beyond the ancient walls of Acre or the Crac des Chevaliers. It teaches us about the intoxicating allure of power and the dangers of unchecked ambition, as seen in the Templars' tragic fall from grace. It illustrates the critical importance of resilience and adaptability, qualities that allowed the Hospitallers to evolve from land-based knights to masters of the sea and survive for centuries after their rivals were gone. Their saga is a masterclass in strategy, highlighting the perils of overreach, the value of transparency, and the undeniable strength found in diversification, whether in alliances, economics, or military tactics. We see how personal rivalries between leaders can alter the course of history, and how geography and environment can be silent, decisive players in any great drama. Most importantly, their story is a compelling reminder that history is rarely a simple narrative of clear-cut heroes and villains. It is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of human nature, our capacity for both profound charity and fierce competition, for noble sacrifice and devastating greed. As we close this chapter, consider how this centuries-old struggle influences our understanding of power and conflict today. In the boardrooms of modern corporations, the halls of government, and the strategies of global institutions, we can still see echoes of the same dynamics that drove the Templars and Hospitallers. Their story encourages us to look beyond the surface of historical events, to seek out the hidden struggles and personal ambitions that truly shape our world. It reminds us that the quest for influence is a timeless human endeavor, and the lessons of the past remain our most valuable guide for the future. If you found this journey into the shadows of history enlightening, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What surprised you most about this epic rivalry? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration into the untold histories that have shaped our world. Thank you for watching, and may we never stop seeking the truths buried